Good to see everybody. Everybody always runs a little bit later, it seems like, on our Focus Sundays. And I think the kitchen crew will be in here pretty shortly. It's good to see you guys this morning, and there is our start of our PowerPoint, which is a good thing. Logan and I are really excited. We've kind of been working together on our lessons this week on the topic of perfected. And we're going to come from two totally different points of view and look at it from a couple different ideas. But we are excited about the material, not because we are the ones presenting it, but because the Word of God is so powerful. And I think we're going to find a couple lessons today that can really be useful to us, really applicable to our lives once we take this text and get this text kind of into our lives and put it to use. Our theme for the day as perfected, mine is perfected in weakness, maybe. There we go, perfected in weakness. And as we think about perfected in weakness, we think about weakness. I think we all have weaknesses in our life. We're having trouble with the clicker. Philip, would you pay attention when I hit that right there? That means go next. Some of the weaknesses that we have, besides the PowerPoint not working. One of them might be a weakness with temptation. All of us in here obviously struggle with temptation, but I think there are people who perhaps struggle more and have a greater weakness when temptation comes. I have visited with people before, for example, that used to have an addiction. My uncle on my dad's side was an alcoholic. And I remember when I was little bitty, I heard my Uncle Arlen say that as he was trying to come in to be sober, he was trying to get away from it. But I remember him saying that even the smell of alcohol was almost enough to set him back again. It's something that affected him the rest of his life. He had to completely stay away from. I have visited with people before who have tried to get off of tobacco, specifically smoking. And one of the fellas I was visiting with one day said, he said, I want to light up a cigarette every day. I think that's how those kinds of addictions affect us. It is just a struggle from then on. It's a weakness that we have. It might also be that we have some kind of physical ailment. It might be, there's all kinds of, the list goes on and on and on. We're going to talk about some specifics in a little bit. But it might be a physical ailment that is our weakness. Maybe we are not able to get around like we want to. Maybe we've got a bad hip or a bad shoulder or a bad heart. On and on, those kinds of things could go. It might be that we have an emotional or a mental anxiety. I was visiting with Kevin Hamill last night at the wedding, and he mentioned to me that this emotional, mental anxiety, especially in the new generation among the millennials, is just rampant. It is something that has skyrocketed, and we're seeing it in our culture more and more as we go along. And that is just a weakness that we might suffer from. It might be a pain for a loved one. I look out across this audience and I see people who are struggling with the pain of a loved one. That may be the worst one of these on this list, but it is a weakness. It is something that changes your life. It changes what you are able to do. You just can't do everything you want to do because you have a loved one that you have to take care of. So when we talk about weakness, that's not all of it, but that is kind of the gamut of weaknesses that we're talking about here. As we move in and we want to think about a text for this, we're going to move into 2 Corinthians chapter 12 in just a minute. But there are four statements that I would like for us to kind of make and perhaps make these mentally. As we talk about these, as we think about these four statements, you may be saying, Layne, I disagree with you here. Well, before you disagree with these, let's say them and then let's come back and put a little bit of meaning on them. So the first one is, I cannot master the sin in my life. That is a weakness that we have, and honestly, brothers and sisters, we all share that one. I cannot master the sin in my life. Number two, I cannot master the pain in my heart. Number three, I cannot master the sickness in my body. And number 4, I cannot master the fear in my mind. Those are 4 things that we as humans cannot master in and of ourselves. We as humans have tried to fix these, have tried to deal with these since we were created, and man has failed over and over and over and over again, and we will continue to fail as long as we have the I out in front. If it's just me, I'm going to fail. We have got to replace that I in front with the church family, with the strength and the power we have from God. We can master these. The problem is that we often say I. It's something that we try to do by ourselves. If we are struggling with a sin, perhaps some kind of temptation, a lot of times we keep that to ourselves. And we think, well, I'll do better next time. And then next week we go, well, I'll do better next time. And then next week, what do? Well, I'll do better next time. Over and over again, it goes. We get in that cycle. We cannot master I cannot do that. I cannot master the sin of my life. So as we think about these and we think about our frailties as humans, our text for the day, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, is perhaps it is at least one of the most powerful verses that we can go to. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, specifically verse 9. What I want to do is 2 things. I want to take a look at verse 9. We're going to pull this verse apart. We're going to look at 5 words, Greek words, in this text. Then we're going to take 2 Corinthians 12, 9, and we're going to put it in the bigger context. We'll take a look at verses 7 through 10 and look at the rest of what Paul says. But I want for us to get this verse first, because the power of what is inside this verse is life-changing for us, brothers and sisters. This is an awesome verse once we understand what in the world God is saying here. Now let's remind ourselves of the context. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, starting verse 7, Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh. I believe this was some kind of a physical ailment that he had. Nobody knows. Some have suggested it might have been his eyes. I think it might have been a speech impediment that perhaps he had to deal with. Perhaps he was crippled in some way. We don't know. But 3 specific times Paul asked God to fix it. And verse 9 is what God tells him. God says to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness." That's what God tells Paul when Paul asks to fix his thorn in the flesh. Again, whatever it was. So let's pull this apart a little bit. First of all, the word grace. This is just a very common word in the Greek, the word charis. We'll find it all through Scripture. But it means a gift, a kindness, a blessing, a favor. And so what God is saying as Paul goes to him and said, "Would you fix this weakness of mine?" God says, "My kindness, my blessing, my favor towards you is sufficient." Well, have we received blessings from God? Have we? Have we received kindness from God? Have we received favor from God? We could spend the next 2 weeks standing up here talking about the kindness of God. We all woke up this morning, right? That was a kindness. That was a favor. That was grace from Jehovah God. We walk out and we see the beautiful morning. We walk out at night and we see this awesome universe that we live in. Is that not a kindness, a favor, a grace from Jehovah God? I wake up this morning, I do not fear my eternal salvation because I have been cleansed, I have been saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. Is that not an awesome blessing, an awesome grace from Jehovah God? You compare this grace of God's to anything that we face. It pales in comparison, brothers and sisters. It's not even close. So here's what God tells Paul. My grace is sufficient. Now the Greek word here for sufficient is the word archeo, and it means enough. So my grace is enough, normal meaning. But there's kind of a secondary meaning that perhaps the Greeks would have picked up on had they read this, and it means to assist. So really what God is saying here, my grace is enough to assist you through your difficulty. We don't have to go anyplace else. God's grace is sufficient to assist us through whatever it is that we're going through. Well, that's great news. You know, I always like to simple things down. You know, in mathematics, we reduce the fraction to the lowest common denominator and simple it on down. That's what I want in life too. And that's what God does for Paul. He narrows it down to the least common denominator, and he says, my grace is what is sufficient. There's no reason to go anywhere else. The third word I want for us to look at is this. My grace is sufficient, for my power is made perfect. The word power here, of course, is a common Greek word. It's the word dynamis. We get the word dynamite from this particular Greek word. We understand that this is a working of the mighty hand of God. This is the same word that was used to describe the miracles that were performed in the New Testament. This is the same word that was used to describe what it took to bring Jesus Christ out of the grave. And God tells Paul, my power, my ability to perform, if you will. God's, not Paul's. God says, my ability to perform is perfected. Now, here's what I want for us to notice here. It is not we. I am not perfected through this procedure. This is a common misunderstanding, a common misquoting of this verse. This has nothing to do with me becoming perfected. This has to do with God's power being perfected. Well, what does that mean? It's discovered in the next word. My power is perfected. God does not promise to take away the weakness, but He promised to give us the power to honor Him through our weakness. And the next word is perfected. Now, this word right here just gives me chill bumps. It's the Greek word teleo, and if you recognize that, it should bring to mind perhaps this instrument right here, which is the telescope. That's the word that Paul uses here, that God uses when He's talking to Paul. It is an unfolding. My power is unfolded before you. It takes place one step at a time until it reaches its full strength. Now let this simmer in your minds for just a minute. Here's what God's saying. I have a weakness. I go to Him in prayer. Now, does God automatically poof? Now, God could, right? I go to God, I'm dying of cancer. God, heal me. God could do it that quick. Not a problem with God's power. But what does God do? He gets me through the next day, right? He gets me through that day. I wake up the next morning, I still got cancer. I go to Him in prayer again. I'm having a little bit more struggle. So I go to prayer. And you know what God is doing every time, according to this verse? He is perfecting His power for me to make it through the next day. And so you view that telescope going out to full power. Start out, and then magnify twice, and then 4, and then 8. Every time, God's power is being perfected in us. You remember back in Exodus chapter 23 and verse 30, the children of Israel are about to go into the promised land. And you remember what God tells them there? He says, I am not going to go in and just wipe out all your enemies. I could, but I'm not. In 23:30, God tells the children of Israel, I will drive them out, how much? That much. Little by little. Every day, God says, I will drive them out a little bit more. God did not wipe out all the enemies of Israel at one time, although it was well within His grasp. Brothers and sisters, there is nothing no weakness that any of us face in here. There is no disease that any of us struggle with. There is no fear or anxiety that God cannot cleanse today. That quick. Why doesn't He? Because God wants His power perfected. And don't we want the power of God perfected in us? I'd suggest to you that is a fantastic blessing. Will we ever understand the power of God in our lives? Well, no, I'm not fully going to ever understand it. But man, if I just asked my genie in the sky, God, would you fix this? And God takes out His magic wand and goes, okay, poof. What good is that? Well, God does stuff like that when He brought in the new message, when He brought in the Messiah and changed the old law to the new covenant. God does things like that occasionally, doesn't he? It's well within his power. But you look from the beginning of creation throughout the history of mankind, God has always dealt with mankind this way. Always. Except in special situations. This is how God lets me grow. It is the power to achieve victory in my life that is truly perfected. Not me, the perfection of the power of God. And I don't know about you, but I need the maximum amount of power in my life from Jehovah God. I just can't make it through the day without it. And that is the promise that God makes to Paul. My power is perfected, and it is perfected through our weakness. We think about our weakness, this is an ailment that deprives us of enjoying or accomplishing what we would like to do. So again, we looked at that initial list. Don't we all have weaknesses? We could go around the room. Everybody in here struggles with some kind of weakness. So I jotted down a few of these. This is not all of them. These, by the way, are problems and ailments and weaknesses from this congregation. Okay? And this isn't all of them. These are just the ones that I know about. That's a pretty good list, right? And you can probably look up there and find yourself somewhere on this list. I just ran out of room. There are a few others that I know about that I didn't put on here. So what do we do with these? I guess that's the question. One of the things that I did this week, I put a post on Facebook, and I know not everybody in here is on Facebook. But I basically asked the question on Facebook, would you share with us your weakness? There were 52, I looked at it this morning, 52 responses from members of this congregation. And I want to read a few of them. Okay, now there's no names associated with these, and I have shrunk them down. Some of them kind of overlap, but let me read some of these. These are our weaknesses as a body. I feel like I am not good enough. Now that one came up several times. I feel like I'm not good enough. There is a voice inside me telling me I won't do that well. I have a fear of failure. I struggle a lot with guilt. I struggle over big things and little things. I just feel guilt. I have the fear of being abandoned. I struggle with depression and anxiety. I am afraid of getting outside of my comfort zone. I have a constant temptation to fall back into past bad behaviors. I'm always running. I take care of everybody. I take care of everything. I'm too busy. My fear is if I stop, everything's going to fall apart. I hold grudges and have trouble getting over them. I often have the present desire to lash out at people. I fear rejection. I fear not being needed. I do not have patience, especially while driving and while I'm at Walmart. We can kind of relate to that. So that's us. I don't know if that hit everybody in this room, but I bet it's in the high 90s. This is us. We all have weakness. We all struggle. And so what are we going to do with this? And I really think that's the question here, is what now? What do we do with these weaknesses that we have? Well, let's take this verse 9, and let's put it back in its context. Let's put them 7 through 10 now. So if you have your Bibles, look at 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 through 10. Paul says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he said, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I would rather boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So let's notice a few things from this text. First of all, we need to recognize that we do have a weakness. So if you're in here this morning and you are a human, and I think most of us in here are, then you have some kind of weakness. If you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, I don't have a weakness, you just found your weakness, right? So we all have weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. And I think that's the first thing. We need to just admit whatever that weakness is. Now, the second thing we find in this text is this. We need to recognize our weakness, and we need to go to God and ask Him to fix it. That's exactly what Paul did. Now, if you're like me, most of the time my answer from God is either no, or, we'll just wait a little while and we'll see what happens. Sometimes God could just fix it. We should never take that out of the realm of possibilities. Maybe the best thing for me and the best thing for the situation I'm in is that God will just fix it. Well, let's ask Him. God, is that what you want? Just fix it for me, would you? If He doesn't fix it, we get up the next morning, we ask Him again. 3 times is enough? No. I think Paul was talking about 3 very specific times when he was undergoing some kind of persecution. He and God probably wrestled about this. With the weaknesses in my life, it is a daily wrestle that me and God have over things. And we just talk to God about it. We need to ask Him to fix it. Number 3, we then do need to allow God's grace to rule in our lives. And this really, I think, is where it's at for us, isn't it? I go to God and I need to maybe ask for forgiveness about a way that I have been praying for you. I pray for this congregation every day, several times. Deep breath. I mention a lot of you specifically in my prayers every day. And a matter of fact, I talked with my wife about this week, and I'm trying to do better in my prayers. But what I've been doing in the past is I just pray for individuals that I know are struggling with things, and I ask God, would you please fix them? God, do what you do and fix them. Give them strength to make it through this. What I need to be praying for is for God to pour out His power on you so that you can make it through another day. And so I have adjusted my prayers on your behalf for you. Not just asking God for healing and comfort and those things that we normally pray about, but asking that you will glorify God through this struggle. Asking that you will be a light in the darkness as you deal with this struggle. We use Demetra Wright all the time as an example. For those that don't know Demetra, go see her. She's at Caris. She's going to go Friday. She's going to be transferred to a nursing home that's behind Golden Corral down there in Sherman. She is a delight. I do not know a human being who has struggled through more physical pain and emotional pain than Demetra. I don't know of anyone. But when we go see her, we leave encouraged. She is able to bless our lives because of her outlook. It is simply amazing. Allow God's grace to rule in your life. Don't get bogged down in this, it's so easy, I know. Just feel bad. It's normal to feel sorry for ourselves. We feel bad. Do that. Get through it and let God's grace work. Be a blessing to other folks as we struggle with these weaknesses. Number 4, be content with where you are. That's exactly what Paul said in verse 10. Therefore, I am well content with my weakness. If I have a weakness, and I do, and I ask God to fix it, and He hasn't, and I ask Him again and again, I need to just be content. God, things for me could be a lot worse. I could be in a whole lot worse situation than this. It doesn't take very long, especially in this congregation, to find somebody that is struggling more than you are. Be content with where you are. Be grateful. that God has put us in a situation where His power can be perfected in my life. And what a great joy that is. And then number 5 from this text, be content, and then just rejoice in God's power. If I make it through another day, it's because of God's power in my life. I didn't give up. I didn't turn my back on Him and run the other way. I allowed His power to bring me one step closer to Him, one step closer to eternity. And that's a decision that we make every day. It's a decision that we have to make. You know, if, for example, we have chronic pain, every time we hurt, we thank God. God, help me be content here. And thank you for your power in my life. Brothers and sisters, I think that this text can make a huge difference in the outlook of our lives as we move forward. I do want to make just a couple kind of application things for us. And the first one is this: how does your weakness affect your ministry to others? This, I think, is a huge question for us to consider. If I'm allowing my weakness to, again, maybe make me feel sorry for myself, or if I'm allowing my weakness to cause me not to interact with brothers and sisters in Christ, you can fill in the blank there. If our weakness is causing our ministry to be bad, is causing our ministry to digress, it's going the wrong way. God's intent is for our weakness to affect our ministry going the other direction. You know, and I've shared this with you, I have struggled with the loss of both my parents to cancer. Dad died when he was 58. Mom died when she was 75, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there, 78, I think, maybe. And so I have lost a loved one, 2 loved ones. Y'all have 2. A lot of folks in here have. What are we going to do with that? Can I use that weakness in my life, that pain, that discouragement in my life, to encourage someone else? Well, I hope so. I hope that my ministry to the Lord's church is such that I use my weakness to help somebody else, perhaps through that same weakness, or perhaps through some other weakness that they are struggling with. But we understand this loss. And how does weakness affect our ministry? And this, again, is something that I would encourage each one of us in this room to think about. How is your personal weakness, whatever it might be, how is it affecting your ministry to others? Are you a more effective minister now than you were before? Or have you moved into a little shell, if you will, and aren't doing the kind of ministry that God perhaps needs for you to do in His family? I think it's a great question for us to consider. And then the second one is this: are you content with God's answer as we go? As we go to our Father in prayer and we ask Him for whatever it is, now, take care of this weakness of mine. And God answers us however God answers. How do we deal with that? Do I get upset at God? One of the things I wanted to mention, and I didn't think about this till this morning, I just didn't have time to put this part in. But you know, one of the things that's real common in our culture right now is this idea of fairness. Is this fair? I hear that a lot from our college kids. I'm sure that y'all are who are in public schools hear this from the kids in school all the time. You know, that's not fair. It'd be so easy for us to see God answer one prayer, and then I ask a prayer for me, and God doesn't answer it. I see one person get well from cancer, and then I see my mom and dad not get well from cancer. From our point of view as humans, that looks like it's not fair. Well, from our point of view as humans, it's probably not fair. But in God's position of His justness as who God is, God will always be fair. God will always be just. We just can't see the way that God sees. And I guess my question for us is this: are we content with the answers that God gives us? Can I live and thrive even though God has said, I'm sorry. There's too many other factors, Layne, in this big scheme of things. I'm taking your dad. I'm taking your dad, Layne. But God wants us to trust Him in that, doesn't He? God, again, knows all of the different avenues, all the different ways that can go, and God picked that one. Am I content with that? I think at this point in my life I am. I still miss Dad. I still hurt inside over Dad. But you know what? I'm content with it. I believe, I trust God. I know He knows what He's doing. I don't always like it. But can we be content in any situation that we find ourselves? Well, our theme for today is perfected. 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Are you allowing the power of God to be perfected in your life? And I guess that's the question for the morning. Are you allowing the power of God to be perfected in your life? I hope that you are. I am done a little bit early, probably about 5 minutes early. I might open this up. Any comments about any of this? Other passages that might come to mind? All right, if you would, join me in a word of prayer, and we'll close Bible class time. God, you are